Can everybody hear me? I will be doing this talk in English, and if I'm speaking too quickly, which will probably happen, please tell me if you don't understand anything, and I'll try to speak more slowly. My name's Kabujiro. I'm an Austrian illustrator, and I paint a lot of things. A lot of you might have seen the illustrations I brought with me. It's the big orange table at the other side of the artist alley. And just to make things easier, I made the presentation orange as well, so that you remember who I am. So I will be talking a bit about the history of Japanese art, particularly Japanese woodblock prints and their influence on pop culture and especially on the work that I do as an illustrator. So you probably know this print. It's the Great Wave off of Kanagawa. It's from a collection of sceneries, and it's by Katsushika Hokusai, roughly mid of the 19th century. And I bring it up because even here in the Artist Alley, I've seen many, many different versions of it. These aren't by myself. I found these on big company websites. There's a Godzilla version, there's Pokemon versions, and pretty much every single popular Japanese series has some spin-off that uses this wave. And that's why it's a great starting point to talking about woodblock prints. I say woodblock prints and not artworks or illustrations because these are prints. They were made thousands and thousands of times, which is why most museums in the world have an original copy of this. So there's not just one finished illustration, but each color is carved on a wood block, usually on cherry wood, meticulously carved, and then using different types of ink, printed layer by layer. And just to make this one print, you need a lot of steps, and it takes a long, long time. So the first one we have up there are the outlines, then we add the blue and the beige and the gradient, and each different color requires a different block that you need to carve separately, make sure it matches up, and then you have this one very iconic, this one very famous image. But woodblock prints didn't start out like this. Like I said before, this was published in 1831, and it was done by a group. Hokusai was the artist, he designed this print, but other people did the carving, other people did the printing, and other people did the publishing and the distribution, because at the time, this was not seen as expensive, fancy art as we see today. An original print of these goes for thousands and thousands of euros. Originally, these were just souvenirs. They were postcards, gifts to friends, and it's unimaginable today that something that takes this much time, that is so complicated to produce, and needs so much skill, both as an artist, creativity, but also just technical skill in carving, could be seen as such a common and nice good. They actually started out like this. This is a very early woodblock print, so around 1600. So this is an art form that's over 400 years old, and it had one color, not a lot of details, and was easier to produce, mainly because the skill required to making good knives and getting good wood was a different one. So in just 200 years, we went from this to this, and we came a lot further. And at the end of this presentation, I will show you what Japanese and international artists are doing with woodblock prints nowadays. But going back to prints in general, because I said they were souvenirs, they were presents, there were three main categories. The first one is a bridge by Hiroshige, also mid-1800s. The one in the middle is a kabuki actor, an aragoto actor for very dramatic kabuki plays. And this is a Kunisada print. And the one on the left is, on the right, I don't know directions, is a Keisei print. And that's the genre of beautiful people. Same as today, if you look at what the cosplayers brought, what other artists brought, we have pretty landscapes, we have celebrities, and kabuki actors at the time were one of the main forms of celebrity starting in the 1700s. And then we have beautiful people, usually beautiful women when we talk about Japanese prints, the bijinga. Bijin just means beautiful person. So these were the three main categories. And a little bit more about the ones in the middle, because I find kabuki very interesting as an art form. Kabuki is one of the three main forms of theater in Japan. We have the No theater, the Kabuki theater, and the Bunraku theater. No is very, very old, very traditional, way older than Kabuki theater. Kabuki theater is the outsider theater, the queer theater, the pop culture theater. And in connection with woodblock prints, we can say that the ones in the middle were the first form of real Japanese pop culture and some of the oldest documented pop culture we have in general in the world. So now we have an anime convention. Back then, if you looked up to someone, it wasn't an anime character, it was probably one of the people in the middle with their shaved head and their bushy hair. There's actually an interesting reason why their hair is shaved like that, and that is that in 1604, a Japanese shrines maiden at a temple, or a shrine exactly, temples are Buddhist, shrines are Shinto, but at a shrine near Kyoto, ran away, met up with a group of prostitutes, and started performing theater on the riverbanks. And that's how Kabuki theater was formed over 400 years ago. And then, not long after, in 1628-29, the Japanese government at the time in Edo did not like this, and they decided, let us ban young men from performing this theater. Let us ban women first. Women were banned because this is an outsider theater. It is very sexual, it is connected to prostitution, and it is very fun. And theater is not allowed to be fun. So in 1629, young men took over. And my favorite law, this is an official law that the Japanese government wrote in 1653, young men are allowed to continue performing theater if they make themselves less beautiful. They decided, because young men were also connected to prostitution in all directions with other men, with young women, they did not like that either, but they cannot ban men and women from performing theater, then we don't have any theater left at the time in this binary gender system. So they decided they had to cut their hair, they couldn't wear makeup in certain ways, and that's how that started. But after these bans were lifted and it became more popular, prints like these started popping up everywhere. So, how does this continue and how does this relate to pop culture in other ways? Here we have an interesting comic. You could see people drawing this today. This is also by Hokusai. It's published roughly at the same time as The Great Wave was. And this is what is called the Hokusai manga. That's also one of the first times the phrase manga came up. Hokusai collected his illustrations, his designs in little sketchbooks. There's 15 books of them. You can get them reproductions now relatively cheaply at most Japanese bookstores. And they just were a collection of his designs. Here he was studying outfits, and he didn't have time to draw a nice head every time. So we have these very cute chibi designs. And these are also one of the first chibi. So if we have really cute chibi artists in the artist alley, this is where that comes from. And not only is that where chibi comes from, but it's also where manga in general comes from. This is another page. Here we have a landscape study, and these were used in one part for people to look at, and another part to teach the students of Hokusai. Hokusai grew quite old and was active for many decades, and he had many young men at the time. Women weren't allowed to do art because women cannot do art, apparently. He used these booklets to teach them because he had so many students, and he moved around. He traveled from city to city in Japan, and when he was old, he didn't stay at the same place for long at all. So he just gave them these books to study. This is how you do a landscape. This is how you do different poses. And it's small booklets, and they have the same shape as manga do now. So you can actually draw a straight line from back then to what we have now. But next to Hokusai, there's a few very important ukiyo-e artists. The first, of course, is Hokusai. Before I showed you the landscape with the bridge by an artist called Hiroshige. And Hiroshige was known for landscapes. He only did landscapes and he did them incredibly well. And I will be talking about Hiroshige again in a little bit when I talk about modern Japanese art. But the next person I find interesting, does anybody know this painting or this woodblock print? Have you seen it before? I'm seeing a few nods. This is the Takayasha, the Witch, and the Skeleton Spectre. It's a triptych, which means it's 3 prints that you hang up next to each other. That's why we have the white lines in between the different images. It is because these were done separately and then you can hang them up as a set. You could collect them at the time. You could get one, then the next in a series like a subscription box today. Instead of a Netflix subscription or a Spotify subscription, you could get a subscription to these woodblock prints. And this is also 1850s. And I find it interesting because recently I was watching Studio Ghibli movies and I was watching Pom Poko. Pom Poko is a lovely story about tanukis doing funny, magical things. And one of the things that came up during the final scene is this skeleton. And if I go back, it's the exact same skeleton. It's a reference to this Kuniyoshi print. This movie was directed by Takahata Isao in 1994. The director unfortunately passed away a few years ago, just before the pandemic. He also did Grave of the Fireflies and Princess Kaguya, for example, and worked very, very closely with Hayao Miyazaki, and together they founded the animation studio. But this isn't the only place that you can find the skeleton. You can also find the skeleton here. This is an illustration that I did. I painted this last year for a yokai illustration work. And if we look closer, over here, we have this very big skeleton, and it's also a direct reference to the Takayasha and the Witch and Skeleton Spectre print, which, if you look close at the bottom, we have different yokai, but the main focus point and the most famous point of this woodblock print is the skeleton. And if you go to the Ukiyo-e Museum in Tokyo, you can actually see, similar to what I showed you before, with the different steps that it takes to make the Great Wave, this has a lot more steps because you need to do all the outlines, and you usually use the key block, which is the black outline block first, and then you do it color by color, and you can see there's a lot of different colors here. But since they don't have the time, it's not really about money at the time because these were made a lot. If you have to print 10 of these, you can do 100 colors and you can carve them all and make them pretty. If you need to make 1,000 of these or 5,000 of these, and some even were made 10,000 times in the initial print run, you're not going to make more steps because you need to print each color separately, they need to dry, and then you need to print the next one. And if you're a publisher, you're saying, similar to anime episodes, we need a single one every week. We don't have time to make the animation perfect. We don't have time to make beautiful movies. We need a lot of episodes. We need a lot of prints. So the orange over there, and the orange at the top, and the orange in the dress, it's all the same color. The blues, all the same color. If we do a gradation, we might do one. You can see in the background, there's a little bit of variation, but otherwise, the gradients in the wood, for example, in the straw, that's not a gradient, that's one color, and then you have black on top in different distances to make it look like different colors. So there's a lot of tricks used in Japanese woodblock prints that are still used today for illustration processes that make things faster, make things more efficient. So when you do this, you need to think not only how can I paint this, and often they start as brush paintings and then are turned into prints, but also how can I make this work logistically with the colors, with the steps, what comes first, and how can I do the least amount of colors for the most amount of impact, because that's what this is really about. The skeleton does not have a lot of colors. The skeleton has 2 colors. The paper is white, that's easy. Then we have a gray, then we have a second gray. So in the face, you see there's a bit of variation. That's it. Very easy, but a lot of impact. And the same goes for manga illustrations. You have black, you have white, and you have gray. And the goal is to create as much impact as possible. And that's what happens with the skeleton here. And that is why I really like this print quite a lot. I used more colors. I kind of cheated. Next time, I'll try to get away with even less. I have a print of this with me if you want to have a look at it in detail as well. You can get it at my table later. Doing a little advertisement for my booth here as well. This is another thing that I quite like. Kuniyoshi didn't only like doing ghosts and a lot of people, he was very fond of cats. So instead of drawing cat boys or furries like you would probably call these now, he drew cats doing everyday activities, playing ball, playing instruments. It's cats in kimonos doing stuff. Whatever people could do, cats could do as well. And he did a lot of them. He did so many of them, actually, that at most bookstores specializing in Japanese art, you can find a book called Kuniyoshi's Cats. And it's an entire book filled entirely with him drawing cats. Not all of them are humanoid and wear clothes. A lot of them are just regular cats lying around. I don't have an image of it with me, but there's a very famous ukiyo-e woodblock print of a courtesan, a Japanese lady of the court, of the imperial court, cutting up her kimono because a cat is sleeping on it and she did not want to wake her. So she would destroy her very expensive silk kimono, embroidered with flowers and designs, just not to wake the cat. And that's what you can see how important cats were and how important cats were to Kuniyoshi with his woodblock print collection. I also am a big fan of cats. And in the middle of this presentation, I thought I would bring some cat pictures. Those are my cats. Both of them have passed away at this point. The picture of them as babies is 20 years old at this point. But last year, as a little tribute to them, I decided I would look at Kuniyoshi's cats and I would go back and paint my own cats in a similar style. And it's something that I love doing. At this point, a lot of people come up, I have cats, I have a dog. I've painted rats and snakes in kimonos. It's a challenge of mine. If you have unique pets and you'd like a lovely illustration, I'm trying to get as many different types of animals in kimonos as possible. I've done a goldfish before and it was very difficult, but it is possible. And you can draw this line from Japanese animals in kimonos to all the fursuits I see back there. It's a similar style. So if you say cat boys don't have a long tradition, they have a very long tradition. That print is almost 200 years old. You know, fun facts for your next dinner party if you go to them. And if this topic happens to come up at a dinner party. I don't know what kind of dinner parties you go to. And it's not just cats you can draw in kimonos. There's other things you can draw in kimonos. But that's all I'm going to say. To that, I have a postcard of that with me as well. In 2020, in February, I was visiting friends in Japan. And then, I mean, we all know what happened after February 2020. March 2020 happened. I flew back. And most of us, I'm guessing, haven't been able to travel to Japan since then, since the borders have still been closed. They just announced a few days ago that they are planning on letting tourists in again, but at the moment the rules are only for organized tours on like a tour bus with like a plan, which is not really how I recommend experiencing Japan. So during the first lockdown, having been in Japan literally 4 days before they shut the borders and made everybody leave, I decided to look at daily life. So instead of looking at ghosts and mythical creatures and huge skeletons or huge scenic imagery, I tried to look at everyday life, and I created a series of illustrations that you can see behind me. I'm seeing on the screen that this one is missing text. They all say the same thing. It's Niseki Seikatsu, which just means everyday life, mundane life, day-to-day activities. And after this, I am going to never draw a vending machine again because those are a lot of bottles. But I've been really stuck with this imagery of just mundane life, things that we're all hoping to go back to. And something that I'm actually enjoying and I'm going to do right after this talk is food. And I've been painting a lot of food as well. These are more inspired by Japanese paintings than woodblock prints. And also, especially these, are inspired by Japanese poster advertising and commercial illustrations. These signs you see outside of old Japanese stores, if you go into the back alleys in Tokyo or in Osaka, that were very popular in the 1960s and the 1970s before photographs and digital illustrations became used in advertising. People created posters like this, not really with these kinds of images, but in this sort of color palette and in these kinds of styles. And that's something that, for me personally, has been very influential. But it's not just us here. All of the artists in the Artist Alley, and I really recommend checking out all of the talented artists here. In 2 weeks, I'm going to Dokumi in Düsseldorf, which is another very large Japanese pop culture convention. There are 750 artists. They have an entire expo center just for artists. But it's not just us young anime fans, old anime fans that are inspired by this. I'm sure you've heard of the next artist I'm going to show you. This is Vincent van Gogh. And these are paintings that are directly inspired by Japanese works. Vincent van Gogh never actually traveled to Japan himself. He was a huge fan of Japanese culture. He had a massive collection of woodblock prints. If you ever get the chance to visit his home, which has been turned into a museum, his main workstation, all of the walls are not covered with Western art, with Impressionist art, which is something that, of course, he is known for with the lily pads and all of that. No, he had one of the largest collections of Japanese prints at the time. But I'd like to pull your attention to that bridge, because before I said we're going to look at Hiroshige again, and also Beautiful Women with Kanan. This is 1887. These two, and I'm going to go back and forth so you can see how directly he was influenced by them. This Eisen print and this Hiroshige print are 1853, so it's only 20 years later. They created art at the same time. They could probably have sent each other's letters. I'm not too well versed in the French and the Italian part of this, but they definitely knew of each other and were influenced of each other. And that is because the dates are important here. Japan was in self-isolation between 1604, 1613 with the Edo period up until roughly 1868. Don't hold me exact on those year dates. I haven't been to university in a while, and they haven't quizzed me on it. But the Edo period was a period of the Tokugawa shogunate, of basically a military regime with the different daimyo in different areas. And they did not let any foreigners in or anybody out. The entire island was isolated outside of Deshima, close to Nagasaki in southern Japan, where artists from the Netherlands and missionaries and merchants could come. It was an artificial island, and they could trade and they could leave. But otherwise, there was no contact. And it's also important that it was the Edo period. Edo is the old name for Tokyo. It's the city. And it's also where the Tokugawa shogunate, the rulers of the Japanese country, lived. And they forced their daimyo, their regional lords, to spend half of their time in the city center. So they had to split their time between their territory and the city center. And that's why all of these images of travel in Japan are so popular. The Great Wave is so popular. These are all sets of roads that lead from Tokyo, from Edo, to the different areas. And then Japanese artists, Hokusai, Hiroshige, Kuniyoshi, traveled across these roads and created series of 32 views of Tokyo, 37 views along of this road, 37 stops of this Edo road. This bridge is one of them. And these are all collections. And similar to postcard clubs now, you could get them in clubs. And there's actually modern equivalents of that as well. So it has a very long tradition. They had breaks in between, but they're back at it and they're trying to rediscover this, which is also why the slogan for the city of Tokyo is Tokyo, Tokyo, old meets new. One Tokyo written in calligraphy, one in a pixelated font. And they're trying to connect old culture with new culture using images like these. Not everything they say from an academic standpoint is factual. Not all of their connections to old culture really exist, but this is one that you can really prove and see for a long time. So this is 1830. So let's do a big jump, because in the meantime, woodblock prints became less and less popular because it became expensive. You needed to know how to carve them, and the skill, even now, is getting lost. But there's a few cool projects which I'll show you next that will kind of go back to the roots of woodblock prints. So let's have a look at this. These are not just illustrations that look like woodblock prints, because I am very inspired by this style, but I do not actually carve these. But this is the Ukiyo-e Hero series by Jed Henry, which started in 2016 as a Kickstarter campaign connected with the Japanese woodblock printing studio Mokuhanka. And I really recommend you checking out Mokuhanka because they live stream every week. It's run by Dave Bull, who is a Canadian who has lived in Japan for over 50 years and is one of the last carvers who has learned the traditional craft of Japanese carving, who actually knows how to produce these prints. And together they did a collaboration. It started with Nintendo prints. It was Toad and Mario and then Pokemon. But since then, since 2016, because it was so successful and people were so excited that they could connect this traditional Japanese woodblock print style with modern Japanese pop culture, that they have done many different things, from Avatar: The Last Airbender, which was actually carved by a friend of mine in the UK, Francis Hanger, who also does similar prints and does reproductions of old prints. So he looks at the print, he carves the exact same print, and he produces it with the same colors, the same techniques, and the same paper to preserve the originals and bring it back to this original idea of these are inexpensive or less expensive artworks that everybody can have compared to the originals. If I were to go back, if I were to want an original of these, there's a Japanese art gallery in Vienna, where I'm from, where I can get a print for around 1,000, 2,000 euros, which wasn't the original goal when making these. So they reproduce them with the same techniques and sell them at an affordable price. But as you can see here, these prints look a little bit different compared to these. They have less of a strong black outline. They have more colors, and the colors are layered in different ways because, surprise, surprise, since going back to the most traditional form of Japanese prints, the early prints with just one color, and then the ones with the black and then the few colors, there was the style of Shinhanga. This is a print from 1920 roughly. Shinhanga really became popular between 1914 and 1942, during the wars, which was a time, the last real time where traditional Japanese prints developed further. As you can see, there's a lot more gradation and there's a lot more layering because they found the colors we use are transparent anyways. You could see that with the skeleton by Kuniyoshi, how there was gray and then there was the same gray layered on top of each other to create different colors. In the Shinhanga period, in the 1920s, 1930s, they became really masters of that. They became experts in doing this kind of design. And this is just one of the many different designs created during that time. So if you look at that and you compare this to this, I think we've come a very long way. This is 1600, this is 1920s, and this is 2020. So you can really see every few hundred years, we get a lot better at what we do. And now I'm sure if you would show the ukiyo-e artists of the 17th century, or even of the 19th century, Kuniyoshi, Kunisada, Hiroshige, Yoshitoshi, which are the big four masters of woodblock prints during that time, what we do digitally, and there's a drawing station over there that I recommend checking out, trying a digital drawing tablet. I'm sure they would use similar techniques, and they would use social media to distribute it to all of their fans. All of the kabuki actors with their big makeup would do something similar as well. They would use the tools at the time, and at the time, this was the most effective and the most efficient tool for creating and spreading art cheaply. Next to the Ukiyo-e Hero series and this, we have the Ukiyo-e Project, which was founded in 2014, which brought together a bunch of very skilled carvers and printers and designers And it's a collective of the last few. When they did an exhibition in Vienna at the Museum for Contemporary and Applied Arts, they showed these posters and they gave a demonstration, a workshop of how this is printed. And the print with Baby Metal and Kiss, they did a tour in Japan and commissioned Ukiyo-e Project to create these designs. This print does not have one color. I mean, you can see that. It doesn't have 10 colors. This print requires 29 different layers. I think it's 29. I didn't have my notes with me. Different colors and different gradients. So printing this alone takes many, many hours. And it's really, they are at the forefront of what you can do with Japanese woodblock prints. They did the same thing with a David Bowie art exhibition. So this is really complicated and really intense. And the reason why Kiss and woodblock prints fit together is because the Kiss makeup is directly inspired by kabuki makeup of roughly the 18th century. When they were on tour, they looked at the aragoto, which is the masculine, dramatic, the evil spirits and the main heroes with the big red and black eyeliner going in all directions and the white face paint. That is where Kiss originally got their inspiration. So it is only natural that you would take a print. This is an Ishikawa print, a Kuniyoshi print, the original one, and the one with Kiss with the star in the eye is Ishikawa, is the designer of this, who did the modern interpretation. So it's not just the great wave that I showed you at the real beginning of this presentation that uses a traditional design and adds modern pop culture. It is also the most traditional craft apprentices who then became on to become masters in their field. They do the same thing. And that's what I find so fascinating about Japanese pop culture. And yesterday, if anybody was at the opening ceremony, when the Japanese ambassador spoke about his love for Demon Slayer and wore a Demon Slayer outfit, it is really very traditional, bureaucratic, official culture combined with Japanese pop culture. And here, if you look at that outfit, I'm not sure if I can zoom in with this, but you can see how detailed these prints have become. Back then, the print is also roughly 1830, and also now, how many colors are used, how many tiny details are hidden in these kimonos. First, the people actually make kimonos like this. If you've ever seen a real silk kimono, the embroidery details and the little elements that you can find in there are really, really beautiful and really intricate, which is why I find the story of the court lady cutting up her kimono to let the cat sleep even more special. But then somebody looks at this kimono and decides, I'm going to make a print of this. Same way K-pop stars have their photo cards, kabuki actors had their cards with their designs in their most famous roles. Somebody had to make these designs as well. And you can see that I'm really passionate about this. I find this incredibly fascinating, not just the skills of the designers, but also of the carvers and the printers. But this is the same print I showed you before. These are just 10 steps. It actually has 17 layers. I skipped a few, but it's nice to see, similar to the Great Wave. You start with the key block with the black, then you add a little bit of gradation, you have the base color in yellow, then you have even more yellow, then you add the green, and the green is layered on top of the yellow to create a gradation. And of course, the most important part, the red and the blue lightning bolt on David Bowie's face. This print also directly references an original Japanese print. And if you go to their website, their name is Ukiyo-e Project. If you Google it, you will find it. You can purchase these prints. They made a few available to the public, but also you can see the behind the scenes and their inspiration. And they also have YouTube videos where they show things step by step, and they try. And their main goal with this project is to keep Japanese woodblock prints, ukiyo-e art, alive. And this is the last print that I'm going to show you that is by a different artist. This is a Japanese designer. It's an area within Tokyo, and it's a design by Shin Tsuchimochi. I am tired, I'm sorry. And as you can see, this has an incredible amount of detail. And if you were to look at this, not only Does it have the gradients in the buildings? If you look at the bridge, you can see how the sunlight and the evening sky directly hits the bridge, and you have this beautiful atmosphere. You can really feel the time of day and feel the emotion and the peacefulness in this image in Tokyo, even though it's modern skyscrapers and not really relaxing Japanese temples or shrines. But the way this was produced is a bit different and a bit surprising compared to the traditional way. And I'm sure if you show this to a few other ukiyo-e carvers especially, they wouldn't be too happy about it. And the reason is that this is laser cut. They take the wood, they take the design is done digitally, and then they use a laser cutter to cut out the wood, and then the only thing the carver has to do is do the tiny details that are too delicate for the laser cutter, and then remove the big area at the top where the sky goes. So you can see the fine lines at the top, and then the different colors printed step by step at the bottom, and how they go together. So you can see here, all of these tiny details compared to when I go back to something like this. Here people even struggled to do the flowers on the curtain. You can see there's gaps, there's things missing, partly because these were printed very quickly and there was not a lot of attention to care, but also because the skill level and the knives and the wood wasn't at the quality needed that we can have now. And that is something that I hear from different Japanese artists that make prints nowadays. Especially, you've heard everything is getting more expensive, especially due to Corona, but wood and paper especially are becoming very hard to find. And I know a lot of Japanese woodblock printers, professional companies that do this for a living, are having huge difficulties getting the wood that they need to carve, because this is cherry tree, and you need very high quality cherry tree because it is a hardwood. And if you need to print this 1,000 times, if you take a soft oak, it'll wobble, it'll move, and then the colors won't fit together, it'll misregister, and you won't have a beautiful print. And they're really doing everything. They're looking at old furniture, they're looking at supply stores that have nothing to do with woodblock printing. Anywhere where they can get high quality cherry wood, they're buying everything because it's so difficult to do this at the moment. And there's so much work time and dedication that needs to go into it. Because we showed you the Pokemon prints before, or I showed you the Jed Henry Pokemon Ukiyo-e Heroes design, I thought I'd show you a collection of prints that I've been doing myself over the past few years. And every 4 to 6 months, I decide I'm going to add a different genre. And these are directly inspired by Japanese woodblock prints, of course. You can see it by the color. These are all prints that you could do traditionally. If I ever have no conventions for roughly 2 years, I would need pretty much another pandemic to get started, because this is a hobby that takes a lot of time, but I could do these traditionally. The flowers are also inspired by the Hokusai manga, which I said earlier, he used as an instruction booklet for his students. And since he has been dead for 200 years, I decided I'm now one of his students. I'm going to take his booklet and learn how to do these kinds of flowers. So there's these 3, and then earlier this year, I created 3 more. We have the ghosts, the electric, and the fairies. If you have suggestions for the next one, let me know after this talk. I'm happy to take suggestions because I have these 6 with me, and people always ask for more as well. So these are things that I particularly like, combining old things with new things, and this sense of nostalgia that you get from these prints. The different consoles, I mean, I'm not that old. The Nintendo DS was my first console, which tells you roughly how old I am. But I have most of these at home because I just like collecting them and I find them a lot of fun. So that's why this entire talk is called Nippon Nostalgia, Inspiration by Japanese Art. Because if you've seen a lot of these woodblock prints, not just the skeleton or the Great Wave, which you will see a lot, but a bunch of other ones, I constantly see things in manga or in video games that I'm like, I know where this is from. This is 200 years old, which is also great. It's in the public domain. If any of you want to create a parody, you can do so. You don't need to ask for permission because they are old enough to be used by everybody. I have one more print with me. This is the final illustration. and also the last thing I'm going to talk about. This is Zenkoji Temple in Nagano Prefecture, in Nagano City to be precise. I used to live in Nagano, and compared to the busy city in the print I showed you by Shin Tsuchimochi, this is really inspired by peacefulness, and it's something that I really, really hope in the next few months or years I will be able to get back to visit my friends who live 2 blocks away from this. And I added dragons because I wanted to. I am an artist, and the great thing about being an artist instead of a simple photographer, although photography, of course, is an incredibly important skill, is I get to do fun stuff like this. I can decide, I will sit in the park, I will draw a temple, and then halfway through I will add dragons because I wanted to. There's a dragon at the top, there's a dragon at the bottom, and there's a baby dragon hiding behind the sake. And this is really my tribute to that, my own nostalgic image of Japan next to the vending machines and the busy city life. This is what I'm looking forward to seeing soon, and I hope it's something that you will be able to experience soon as well. That was my talk, and I hope you learned a little bit about old Japanese art and a little bit about new Japanese art, and I hope at least some of it was interesting. Thank you very much.